Sometimes, it takes only a single leaf to hold together the fragile thread of life. In the heart of a cold New York winter, as leaves surrendered one by one to the storm, there remained one, stubborn, unyielding, clinging to the wall like a whisper of hope. And it was this last leaf, stronger than the wind, stronger than despair, that became a light for a soul ready to give up. Away from the hustle and bustle of New York City, on the western side, there was a neighborhood, Greenwich Village. In the early 20th century, this place was considered a haven for artists, musicians, and dreamers. The streets were paved with stones, the houses were built of old bricks, and curtains peeking from the windows were often colorful. At the corner of the street, you would find a coffeehouse where coffee and bread were sold at cheap prices. On the walls were charcoal sketches, where local artists poured out their imagination. The atmosphere here was unpolished, yet brimming with creativity. This was the place where two young girls, Sue and Johnsy, had come to live. Both were artists, and both had dreams filled with colors and lines. Sue had come from Maine, a small town. She was calm by nature, but carried within her an unshakable determination. Her paintings carried the fragrance of the earth, the views of fields, the sea waves. She wished that one day her art would earn her recognition. On the other hand, Johnsy had come from California. She was cheerful, lively, and sometimes a little stubborn. Her imagination soared high, and her paintings reflected light, dreams, and glimpses of life. The two had met in an art class. Their conversations flowed so easily that it seemed they had known each other for years. Soon, they decided to share a studio apartment. It was a modest little place at the top of a brick building in Greenwich Village, the kind of neighborhood where struggling artists and dreamers gathered. The stairways were narrow, their room was on the upper floor, with a big window that overlooked the walls of the opposite building and an old ivy vine. The windows creaked in the wind, and the room smelled faintly of turpentine and paint. But it was theirs. It was home. Inside the room stood two easels, brushes, paints, and unfinished canvases. In one corner, there was a small stove where they would warm soup in winter. The room did not hold much luxury, but it was filled with art, colors, and their friendship. In the evenings, they would sit together making sketches. Sue loved painting natural scenes, while Johnsy often painted emotions and people. Their laughter and conversations kept the studio alive. Both believed that one day they would find success. Sue and Johnsy were happy in this environment. They had little money, but never lacked dreams. At times they sold old clothes to buy paints and at times their sketches to make ends meet. On cold nights, the two would sit by the window, gazing at the vine outside, weaving dreams. Johnsy would say, "Look, Sue, how old this vine is, yet it still stands. It feels as though it too knows how to keep living." Sue would smile and reply, "Yes, and perhaps it's teaching us the same lesson." But that year's winter was very different. The leaves turned yellow and brown, and the sky seemed heavy with gray. With the changing season came a fever that swept through the town. It was pneumonia. That word sent shivers into people's hearts. Doctors and nurses hurried from house to house, and many lives were claimed by the cruel illness. It was in those weeks that Johnsy fell sick. At first it was only a cough, then weakness, and soon she could no longer rise from bed. The doctor came, carrying his bag, his face lined with seriousness. He felt her pulse, listened to her chest, and sighed. "She is very weak," he said. "Her chances are slim, 1 in 100, I would say. But medicine is not enough. What she needs most is the will to live. If she loses that, no treatment will work." The words sank into Sue like ice. She nodded, fighting back tears, and promised to do everything she could. But Johnsy lay still on her bed, her face pale against the pillow, her eyes fixed on the window. Outside their window grew an ivy vine, clinging to the old brick wall of the house next door. Its branches stretched high, but the wind and rain had stripped most of its leaves away. Day after day, more leaves fluttered to the ground. Johnsy began to count them. She whispered to Sue one evening, her voice faint as a sigh, when the last leaf falls. "I will go too." Sue froze. "Johnsy. What nonsense is this? You are not leaves, you are not vines. You are my friend. You are alive, and you will fight this illness. Please don't talk like that." But Johnsy only turned her face toward the wall and said softly, "I know it. When the vine is bare, I shall be finished too." Sue tried everything, stories, laughter, sketches on her canvas, but Johnsy's eyes always returned to that window, watching the leaves fall one by one. Finally, unable to bear it, Sue went downstairs to visit old Behrman. Behrman lived in a dark little apartment beneath theirs. He was an old painter, past 50, with a beard and fierce eyes. He spoke gruffly, often with anger, but behind his rough voice lay a tender heart. For 40 years he had dreamed of painting a masterpiece, yet he had never begun it. He lived poorly, often posing as a model for other artists to earn a little money, and he drank to dull his disappointments. Old Behrman had known Sue and Johnsy ever since the two young women had rented the little studio above his. Though he was rough in speech and often grumbled about life, he had grown fond of them in his own quiet way. They reminded him of the fire and dreams he once had as a young painter, and he would often pose for their sketches or stop by to see their work. To the girls, he was like a gruff but caring guardian, lonely, poor, and still waiting for his masterpiece, yet always watching over them with a hidden affection. So, when Sue told him about Johnsy's strange belief, that her life was tied to the falling leaves, Behrman's eyes blazed. "What foolishness!" he shouted. "Leaves! Death! Ah! That poor little child! How can she let such nonsense fill her head? She must not give up hope. No, she must not." But then, his voice softened. "She is very weak, yes. Very sick." He looked out the window at the storm beginning to rise. "Do not worry. Perhaps something can be done." That night, the wind howled through the village. Rain splashed against the glass, cold and unkind. Sue closed the curtains and begged Johnsy not to look. But Johnsy only whispered, "Tomorrow the last leaf will fall. And then I will go too." Sue held her hand through the night, her heart breaking. When morning came, Sue gathered her courage and pulled the curtain aside. She gasped. There, on the vine outside, still clung one green leaf. Against the wet wall, against the storm's fury, it remained. "Look, Johnsy," she said, her voice trembling with relief. "The last leaf is still there." Johnsy turned her head slowly. Her eyes widened. She stared at the leaf for a long time. "It has stayed," she whispered. "It did not fall. All that day the wind blew, the rain poured, but the leaf remained." In the evening, when Johnsy asked for the curtains to be opened again, it was still there. Dark green, firm, unshaken. The doctor came the next morning and found new strength in Johnsy's pulse, new color in her cheeks. He smiled. "She has turned a corner. With care, she will recover." The days passed, and Johnsy slowly regained her strength. She could sit up now, even smile a little, and the window that once seemed like a silent doorway to death now became a doorway back to life. The leaf outside had done its work. It had stood firm against the storm, and so had her spirit. But while life returned to Johnsy, another life in the same building was fading away. Downstairs, old Behrman lay in his cold little room. No one knew, not until it was too late, that he had gone out into the storm that night, brushes in his trembling hands, paints tucked under his coat. The rain had lashed at him, the wind had cut through his thin jacket, but he had not stopped. Under the faint light of a lantern, his fingers stiff, his back aching, he painted with all the strength left in his body. He painted the last leaf onto the wall, so real that not even the eyes of despair could doubt it. Stroke after stroke, he poured into that leaf the courage of his heart, the love he carried quietly for those two girls upstairs. It was not just color he painted, it was his soul. 2 days later, Behrman was found in his room, shivering and weak, his clothes still damp. Pneumonia had taken hold. He had no family to tend to him, no one to notice his suffering in the night. By the time help came, it was too late. Sue heard the news first. Her face turned pale, and her voice trembled when she told Johnsy. "Behrman, he is gone." Johnsy's lips parted in shock. She whispered, "Gone? But how?" Sue sat by her side, her eyes glistening. "He was ill. The neighbors found him in his room. He had been out that stormy night. They found his lantern, his brushes, and paints. And they realized what he had done. That last leaf on the wall, Johnsy, it was not a leaf at all. It was his painting. He painted it that night in the rain. So that you would believe, so that you would live." For a long moment, Johnsy could not speak. She turned her head toward the window. The leaf was still there, strong and green, clinging against the wall. But now she saw it differently. Every line of it carried Behrman's breath, every shade of green held his sacrifice. Tears welled in her eyes. He was alone. No family, no one to love him. And yet, he gave me everything. His life. For mine. Sue touched her friend's hand gently. He always spoke of a masterpiece, didn't he? He thought he had never painted it. But now, this was his masterpiece. Not hanging in galleries, not praised by the world, but painted where it mattered most, in our lives. The two girls sat in silence, hearts heavy with sorrow. The leaf outside had become more than a leaf. It was courage. It was sacrifice. It was the quiet, unspoken love of a man who had little in the world, but who gave all he had in his final act. And so, in the quiet of Greenwich Village, the story of the last leaf remained, not just as a tale of art and death, but as a reminder that even the loneliest soul can leave behind a light, a memory, a masterpiece carved in the hearts of others. The last leaf did not just cling to the wall, it clung to hope, to sacrifice, to love. Behrman had no family, no fame, no riches. Yet in the end, he gave the greatest gift of all, hope. And though Behrman was gone, his masterpiece breathed life into another, and that made him eternal.